we, the way that we typically do this is I'll just talk briefly about myself, how I got into the industry, and then talk about our macro outlook and why we're doing what we're doing in an industry that is, pretty mature at this point, entering year 40 of the quick lube industry being an actual industry. So I have extra time, so we can go past 11:15 if need be, if we have a lot of questions. But just a little bit about me. I started in finance. I grew up in Portland, Maine, came to Maryland, met my wife here. That's how I ended up here in Maryland. And started off in retail banking at TD Bank, moved to brokerage at TD Ameritrade, then moved to asset management with Merrill Lynch. And then lastly, with T. Rowe Price, as Michael mentioned, in Baltimore, in asset management. And so that's why it's kind of ironic coincidence that I started doing all this consulting for this company in New York on Valvoline, which is the only publicly traded company in our space. Although technically Take 5 is part of Driven Brands, but that's more of a multinational conglomerate versus Valvoline, which is very reliant on its Valvoline. It's an oil change business. In any case, I've always been entrepreneurial. I've always had side businesses. And so when I moved from place to place, I always thought it was the actual business itself that was the reason that I was having trouble, finding my place in the workforce. But what I found out was once I started this business was that it was not that. It was just, I was born to be an entrepreneur and I was born to build businesses. And so, but at the time, I was very invested in my career in finance. I have a master's of science in finance. I also have an MBA. TD Ameritrade had sponsored my series 6, 7, and 66. And so I was very well invested in my career. I did not think I was going to leave my job, but I thought that if I scratched that entrepreneurial itch, that I would be able to kind of be content with where I was at. So I looked at businesses that I felt were manager centric, but not skilled manager centric. That's a phrase that I've used quite a bit on these calls, but to me, what that meant was, if the manager is sick or if the manager quit, is there continuity of the business? Is it like a pizzeria where if your pizza maker goes down, then you have no one to make pizza unless you do it yourself? And so I looked at a few different business models and ultimately found this quick lube in Harrisburg that the owners were ready to retire, getting ready to check out, and they were willing to do some seller financing, and the manager had been with them for 8 years at that point. And so I said, if the manager stays, then I'm interested. Learned to run the business from my desk at T. Rowe Price. Spent a lot of time reverse engineering the business by reading reviews on Yelp because Yelp was still relevant at the time. And I put my own thoughts into how the business should be. And 6 months later, I was just having a little bit too much fun running the business, and I left T. Rowe Price and started doing it full time. I had some pretty pointed views on where I thought the industry should go because I felt that there was a void in the space that the consumer was not feeling was getting filled. And I believe that most large businesses most good businesses become what they are by filling a void in the consumer space. And so, from day one, we've been very consumer driven. I looked a lot at what the pain points in the industry were and thought, how do we fix some of these things? There were some reputational issues in the quick lube space. The leader of the space had been on top for a really long time with no one really holding their feet to the fire. And so I felt that there was some opportunity there. And then also this was 2014, 2015. There was really no one using paid social at the time. And so we implemented a pretty aggressive paid social strategy, and that paid off quite a bit because no one else in our space was doing it. So it was relatively inexpensive at the time. And that gave us a huge advantage in terms of the local markets that we were in. And, our business is very geographically restricted. It's, there's not much scale outside of opening multiple locations. And so if you win your local market, you've won because there's, someone's not going to drive from 4 hours away to get an oil change. There's a an economic point where it just doesn't make sense. And so we opened a second store in a town called Dillsburg, Pennsylvania, which is a small town of about 6,000 people, and took what we did in Harrisburg and implemented it there, saw success again. And then our third location was in Mount Prospect, Illinois. A friend of mine that I had played baseball with after college overseas, he lived in Niles, Illinois, said, "Hey, this Quick Lube is for sale. Are you interested in taking it over?" I said, "Yeah, why not?" I was probably 26 at that time, and so not a lot to lose. And very early on in the history of this business, absentee ownership was woven into the DNA, because that's where I really learned to have processes and SOPs and third-party software to run the business from 800 miles away, because it was physically impossible to be in Chicago on a regular basis. And so I feel like we've got a really good process in place. We got up to 10 locations before I thought about franchising. Franchising is the best way to scale the model, and I think the model resonates with people, and that's why we've had such success selling these franchises, is because our model, I do believe, is one, what the consumer wants, and two, operationally, I think the best model in the space. And so with those two things combined, we've had a lot of success. I could go on and on about this history of the business, but I think Q&A is probably a much better use of everybody's time. And if anyone does have any questions about, the history part of the business, or, pain points while growing the business, be certainly happy to answer those. We have Discovery Day the third Thursday of every month, and it's been a very successful process of getting franchisees in, and everyone on this call is more than welcome to come to our Discovery Day, where we get into the nuts and bolts of the business. So if we could keep questions to kind of as macro as possible, I'm more than happy to answer pointed questions, but it's a lot better for us to have the secret sauce kind of. That's what Discovery Day is for, versus on these calls, which is more of an introduction to the brand and kind of the model. So yeah, Michael, I'll let you curate questions, and we can go as long as need be today.
Okay. Costa, thank you. If Christine and Nuri don't mind, and then I see someone else joined us as well. Would you mind just letting us know who you are? It's a 706-910-2570 number. And you're on mute right now. Okay. All right. I'm not getting a response right now. Costa, I'm not sure if you heard me just finishing up, but Brian has asked about running the business, sort of semi-absentee in a sense. He has a large business already, and so he's wanting to appoint a general manager. I told Brian, we sort of class a general manager as a territory manager, but maybe you could speak a little to the manager-centric model more when you took over, when you were at T. Rowe Price. I think the manager was key for you, and how that plays into this model, and what the ideal number of units would be to fund a general manager. I've always heard you talking about 3 to 4 units, I think would be optimum. And this would be a first question.
Yeah, so in our model, especially if the stores are in a geographic region that's consolidated, the territory manager actually participates in the actual oil change process. And so 3 stores is like the perfect number to hire that territory manager. Each store should still have its own store manager. And for us in the past, we've even had a store manager, moonlight as the territory manager, because of that floating nature of the position. And that central point of contact can make it a lot easier to run the business. The traditional model in our space is to have a store manager who's, sits in an office inside the store, an assistant manager who stands out in the bays and kind of oversees operations. And then you have what are called upper bay technicians and lower bay technicians that do the actual oil change. And then sometimes stores even have a, what they call a picker, which is someone who goes out and talks to the customer before the car comes in. And then sometimes even, a front desk person to sit there and do the actual transaction at the end of the service. We've eliminated a lot of that redundancy. And the territory managers and some of our competitors, they're typically, not even in the field. They might be at a centralized office that, maybe once a month they go into the stores and check in with the store managers. And so that kind of redundancy is, it's not very efficient. And it's also not a good way of keeping tabs on what's going on inside the stores. And so the territory manager for us is an actual person who does the oil changes, but is our central point of contact that we are able to, keep a pulse of what's going on at the regional level. We have a group manager group text, and fortunately, I don't know when it happened, but Apple allowed to have more than 10 people on the text or whatever the limit used to be, and now you can have as many on the group text as you can, because we have we're going to have 20 corporate locations by the end of 2022. And so we have a large group text with our managers that has been a great way of handing down basically initiatives from the company level. We've implemented Slack recently, which for our business, employees are not typically, familiar with that type of system, but we're going to try to integrate Slack at a couple different levels of the organization to just make sure there's oversight. Because at the end of the day, the question is about oversight. It's about quality control. It's about making sure that things are going right. And so, by eliminating a lot of the moving pieces, we don't have as many SKUs, we don't have as many employees, we don't have as many services. For me in those early days, it was easy to keep tabs on things, even while having a, 55-hour a week job at T. Rowe Price, because there wasn't a lot happening. It's a very simplistic model. And that's kind of the key to the whole thing.
Great, thank you. Brian, if you've got additional questions at the end, please go ahead and ask. We'll run through the other candidates that are on the call this morning. Nuri, do you have a question for Costa? Nuri Shakil? Okay, you're on mute right now. There we go.
Hi guys, good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, no, I'm just hearing the questions, and so no questions, but I'll probably ask a few questions later down the road, but thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you for joining us. Christine, good morning. Do you have a question for Costa?
Oh, good morning. No, not right now. I just kind of want to listen in.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Well, I have a if nobody's asking a question, I would like to ask a couple of questions. First question that I have is, typically speaking, when we open up a store, how long does it take for it to, like, what should be our expectations on average? Obviously, every location is different, but to break even, like how many months does an average store starts to break even? And then that's just something that I wanted to kind of know, if you can kind of like give me like an average, like if you have that data.
Sure. Hey, so Nuri, that's a good question, and I appreciate it. The FTC heavily regulates financial representations at the franchise level, so I can't go into like any kind of specifics outside of what's in that item 19, and especially on when we're recording this. But what I can say is that per Valvoline, which is a publicly traded company that has massive documentation of what they do, they consider the ramp up period for their stores to be anywhere from 12 to 4 years before maturity. Now, ramp up doesn't necessarily mean break even or profitability or negative cash flow. That's just a term that is used in this industry. I would like to consider our ramp up period 9 months. I think we're a little bit more accelerated because we have less overhead and we have what I believe to be better marketing strategies to getting new customers in the door. Plus, from a price point perspective, we're seeing a increase in our same store sales because of being able to maintain lower price points in an inflationary environment where other people are increasing, more than the cost of inflation. They're capturing more than their margin. They're actually expanding their margins. So by just not being as, if you want to use the term greedy, we've been able to see increases in our business. And by being a very pointed business, a very specific business, and being very good at what we do, that helps accelerate that ramp up period. But as you said, a lot of it can be location dependent. We work with the franchisees to find the best locations. And there's only so much real estate, and we just came off a very strange real estate market. So, finding good space was difficult there for a while. Things have seemed to cool off, but we're not reinventing the wheel here. So there are some headwinds that come in this space that everyone needs to be aware of.
Costa, just to add, you mentioned the marketing mix. I think one of the areas that is available to ramp up, ratchet up sales quickly is going after the fleet business, not only attracting the residential customers that are 3 to 3.5 miles from your location, but I think the other piece is going after contractors, these companies that have fleets of trucks and sedans. They're very cognizant of their employees having to sit, at some conventional auto lubes for an hour, 2 hours, where there may be, two workers in the truck or van, and they're sitting around while they wait, to get an oil change. So I think that's a very attractive piece that you could have a major effect on, the growth of the business early on.
Yeah, fleets are definitely one of the best ways to combat and shorten that ramp up period, because if you land an account of, say, 15 plumbers trucks and or some construction vehicles, fleet of salespeople, that reoccurring nature really does help shorten that ramp up period. And that's just 100% of sales. That's going to be that's a sales side of the business, is being able to reach out to these guys, explain to them why it's beneficial for them to use you instead of going to like a Midas or a Meineke, where these owners understand that every minute that their truck is not on the road doing work, that they're losing money. So for a lot of our fleets, we're a godsend, because they send the car in. We actually have a couple of fleet accounts where they are so large they have an internal mechanic, but when the mechanic is backed up, they still pay to send it into us, just to get it done so that their cars can be back out on the road. So Michael makes a good point with the fleets. That is a good way to negate that ramp up period.
Great. So we the person at 706, there's a phone number here. I don't have a name, unfortunately. 910-2570. Do you have a question for Costa? And then if you could let us know who you are, that would be great. Okay, we're still on mute. Brian, do you want to go ahead and ask Costa another question, or cover the topic that we talked about earlier further?
Sure. Can you hear me? I just think I unmuted the call.
Yes, we can.
Okay,
I can.
good.
Yep.
Okay. What could we speak more to? You had mentioned like the customer experience, or what the customer wants. What did you find out that was, and how did you, like, what service is going to be different here than if they go to like a Take 5, or if they go to one of those other, I guess, competitor brands?
Yeah, that's a great question. Take 5 is kind of another mousetrap. Valvoline does a good job of sticking to the original model that created the industry in the first place. I think we've seen Jiffy Lube kind of diverge from the actual quick lube model, which has not really been great for them because they've been seeing a loss of stores year over year, while the other companies have seen a increase. Our moat comes down to a couple things. One, the actual environment that our employees offer, right? So in Take 5, a lot of the guys are compensated based on gross sales of the store or a percentage of certain things sold. So a customer doesn't want to get beaten over the head for all these other services. And then two, price, because we believe that unbranded oil doesn't matter in this space and that our customers are more concerned with convenience. We're not tied to any brand that has a marketing expense built into the COGS. And so that's really been our moat, is that we're not overstaffing. We have a more efficient model in terms of how quickly we can do the service. So I would say that our bay time is probably shorter than a Take 5 or a VIOC. And so then it really comes down to, is there a quality independent quick lube in the area? Because that has been a more difficult hurdle for me as I've gone into these different markets, whether it's central Pennsylvania, western PA, eastern Ohio, western Illinois, is figuring out how do we create that moat. And the model itself does a good job of it, but definitely it can be regionally dependent. I'm not too concerned with Take 5 because they're more of a real estate company than they are an oil change business. There, if anyone's familiar with crexi.com, just type in oil change and you'll see that these guys are going to be putting a lot of downward pressure on their operators, and it's gonna not have it's long term, it's not sustainable what they're doing right now. VIOC, on the other hand, like they for the most part do things right. They still have high pressure upselling, and but they also have a premium built into their expense, and they're probably the most expensive quick lube on the of all the what I would call the chain quick lubes.
Speaking
Costa,
of expense, what is Costa's price for like an oil change? Because we took some of our trucks out. I mean, it is so expensive now to get an oil. I couldn't believe it. I mean, the prices are in our market. They're so.
Where'd you go, Brian?
We took them. Well, there's a place down the street here. I don't know the name of it. They wanted over $100.
What vehicle? Was it like an express van?
Yes.
Like a Chevy Express van?
Yes, exactly. A Chevy
4.6.
Express.
So
yes.
Yeah, so that truck takes 6 quarts of oil, and our industry standard has always been 5 quarts and a spin on. So that car doesn't necessarily need the Chevy Express vans and the Eco Lines, the E350s. They don't need full synthetic, but a lot of fleet customers will choose to do it to have that longer interval. Our base price right now for full synthetic is $79.99. Jiffy Lube and Valvoline have moved from $79.99 to $99.99 in most markets, and everybody on this call can certainly do their own independent research, but most of the competitors have moved to a $99.99 oil change, which means that even before sales tax, you're already at $100. And so if you include that extra quart that they're going to charge probably $10 for, that's just speculation. They might charge $10 for that extra quart. Now you're at $110. If they charge a shop fee or tool fee, everybody's gotten creative with their extra hidden fees these days. You can very quickly get up to $140, $150 on some of these vehicles. And so we've done a good job. Now, we don't dictate pricing at the franchisor level. So our franchisee in Mesa, Arizona has gone to $89.99 for full synthetic because that's in line with the market that they're in. But for me, and everybody's supposed to have the same economy of scales. We've worked very hard to get our suppliers to price match corporate for our franchisees. That's one of the whole points of franchising, is to have that scale. And so, if it's possible to go for that higher price point, then we don't dictate that. But, just from my experience, especially, Q1, Q2 of 2022, we've been able to capture market share by maintaining the lowest price, because people are getting sticker shock. And this is, people like round numbers. That's been a tried and true theory in at least trading for a long time. And so as soon as that number breached 100, people kind of are like, if it was 94, 95, there's not as much. I think Sam Walton was actually like a huge proponent of, that's why everything in Walmart is like 88 cents instead of 99 or whatever it is. But in any case, we've been capturing a lot of new market, and they've been saying, hey, we went to, Castrol Express Lube, and my Ford Focus with the V6 engine is, 90 whatever dollars for a synthetic blend. And so that's been, kind of something we've been able to, that's been benefiting us.
Is there two different oils then, or is it just the one synthetic that
No, so
we'd be offering?
our industry has operated on a good, better, best model since its inception. There's been conventional synthetic blend and then full synthetic. There's also high mileage as well, which helps increase ticket average. But that's a whole different conversation. We eliminated conventional from our inventory. So we just have synthetic blend, which is $39.95. And then we have full synthetic at $79.95. And we were, just a year ago, our full synthetic was $67.99, but, we're not immune to the inflationary pressures either. So we had to increase, and it was the first time we increased since 2015. So, but that being said, we've been able to stay 10, 20% lower than, our competitors, which has been great for, customer acquisition.
Do you have to do, I mean, can like, if you get fleet accounts, can a fleet account go with synthetic blend, or does it have to go full synthetic?
If the car calls for a full synthetic in order to maintain warranty, the way that we've always operated is we're not going to fight with the customer. So the GM vehicles that are newer than 2012 all require Dexos oil, which is just it's a spec that GM came up with to try to funnel people back into the dealerships. If you do not use Dexos and you have a problem with your car, and GM can somehow prove via an invoice that you were not, it could have nothing to do with the oil change. It could be like an O2 sensor, and they're like, oh, you weren't using Dexos oil, your warranty is voided. The dealerships are going to do whatever they can to get you out of having warranty work done. So what we tell customers is, your car calls for this. It is required to maintain your warranty. If you are choosing to go with a synthetic blend, even though your car calls for, say, full synthetic Dexos oil, we just put the notes on the receipt. We have an indemnification clause, and we say, look, this is what the customer wanted. But at the end of the day, the only thing that really matters to the vehicle is the viscosity, which is the number 5W30, right? So all the viscosity is the thickness or the thinness of the oil at different temperatures. And so if a car like your van probably calls, if I know the engine probably calls for 530. And so whether it's full synthetic or synthetic blend, the viscosity doesn't change. It's just what the oil is made out of determines whether it's full synthetic or synthetic blend. And so it'll operate, it'll operate at the same capacity. It just will break down differently because of the components of the oil itself.
So really, if the viscosity doesn't change, then you could go synthetic, even though it would potentially void the manufacturer warranty. Potentially.
Well, yeah, going up would never do that. It would be going down. And it's typically it's typically spec related, it's not binary like full synthetic versus not conventional or synthetic blend. It's mostly spec related, meaning like VW has a VW spec, BMW has a BMW spec, and if the oil meets those specs, that's what they care about. It just so happens that most of those cars, those spec oil only is made in full synthetic.
Okay.
I have a question, please.
Sure.
Like some franchisees, some franchisors, they regulate the pricing. I believe, I'm not really sure, but do you guys do that, or is it based on like whatever we feel like it's relevant in our market, or do you have a cap, or do we have to get permission to, like, what if we want to charge a little bit less, or maybe our rent is quite high because of the location, so we can charge a little bit more? Do we have that freedom?
Yeah, we don't dictate pricing at the franchise or level. We will always tell you what has worked for us. You know, franchising is largely paint by numbers. That's the point. We've, you know, made all the mistakes so that you don't have to. So, however, on a, you know, on a one-by-one basis, we understand, you know, we've never done business on the West Coast. We've never done business in Texas. So we will, you know, we will work hand in hand with our franchisees for best practices. And so we're not going to assume that everything is done the same way in Western Ohio as, you know, Florida. So that's how we operate. And the FDD discloses what we do and do not mandate. And there's very few things that we mandate. Just for me, when we mandate something, that just kind of speaks to how strongly I feel about it. But we don't mandate a whole lot. We do have parameters in place and suggestions, and you know, we've basically created a system that if you follow our steps in our checklist, we believe you'll have a successful quick lube. But you know, I truly believe that franchisees are business owners, and I'm not gonna, you know, I don't want to treat our franchisees as if they're, you know, children that need to be told what to do. They, you know, we'll lead you to water, but you know, we want you to be able to drink.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, Costa, I think one of the important facets that I picked up from you in this business is chain of custody. And, you know, you mentioned going through the mistakes. I think that is a big thing that the franchise brings to help the franchisees, is just the system that you put in place to limit your liability. Maybe you could expand on that a little bit.
Michael, could you repeat that last part?
Oh, it's just around the chain of custody and liability. I think you've been very smart about you know, protecting yourself, servicing vehicles.
Yeah, well, so all of our services, you know, we receive the money at the point of sale. No customers' vehicles are left overnight. So it's different from auto repair in that sense. You know, the type of insurance that we carry is a little bit different. We have systems in place with multiple levels of assurance points that, you know, avoid the more common incidents in our space. There are some just human errors that can't be avoided. But for the most part, we have protections in place through our systems and our flow chart that protects us from the more common occurrences in the quick lube space. So, you know, we run a lean shop, and that's kind of, again, from an operator's perspective, that's our moat. We're not going to require a massive staff and a massive building and a massive amount of SKUs. And so by simplifying the business, that also leads to a more relaxed staffing environment. And then you get more output from your employees because their expectations aren't, you know, way out of whack with what they're being paid. And that's been helpful as well. But, you know, we're not reinventing the wheel or anything, but we just tried to make everything a little bit better based on the stores that we've opened over the years and kind of tweaking it here and there. So operationally, I think we have a very sound business.
I have another question, please.
Sure.
Okay, so you know, obviously running a lube shop, is it possible, or I don't know what you guys' stance is, but what if we want to open just to, you know, increase our average ticket or more customers, and then can we open like, and can we offer additional services if we want to? Like, let's say our market allows that, and we want to open like a tire shop next to it, or could it be like, could we run like another operation through our shop, or have additional, maybe we can do like sell more things to increase our revenue, or you guys regulate that, like you only
Yeah,
can do
we're
this?
at the store level, we're never gonna, we've literally trademarked the phrase, the oil change only store, where that's something I feel very strongly about. You know, if we start doing all these other services, we're gonna get lost in a sea of shops that do the same thing. And then you get, when you don't have any brand equity and you don't have that niche kind of following, then you get into a race to the bottom on pricing. You know, a lot of people don't realize Midas, Meineke, Monroe are different companies owned by different, you know, ownership groups. And I think that if we go down that road of doing all of the above, then what's our differentiator? And so we're going to very heavily stay on top of making sure that we don't do things outside of oil changes. That being said, and I'll have to defer to Michael on this, I'm sure that our FDD and our franchise agreement has some kind of non-compete in it, but you know, we utilize full service shops all the time, especially these days where oil changes are losing these companies a lot of money, because places like Midas and Meineke, they use oil changes as a loss leader. And with the increase in cost of labor and the increase of costs of goods, they're losing substantial amount of money by doing oil changes. And so we've partnered with different stores like Mavis Tire to they send us their oil changes and we send them everything else, because we're not doing anything else. And so that's kind of been a benefiting factor here, is that increase in collaboration. And so I'm sure that on a one-off basis, we can have a conversation about allowing a full service shop, but we're never gonna allow that inside of our shop. And the buildings are not designed for it anyway. The buildings are not designed for full service work. So it's not even, you know, it's not something that would be able to be done well anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
I had a question.
Go ahead, Brian.
From a recruiting standpoint, how long are you seeing it take to, you know, like what's a typical recruiting cycle look like in terms of when you need like an oil change technician, or if you're looking for like that store manager? What are you seeing now with the labor market?
So we utilize Facebook almost exclusively for store level employees. You know, the other channels like Indeed and those websites are not really great tools for finding employees. And so Facebook has been a really good tool for finding store level employees because of the ability to do paid ads, paid classifieds. And so, you know, we just opened a new store in Milan, Illinois, and we post an ad. Within 24 hours, we'll have 7 to 10 applicants. We'll schedule 5 of them for interviews. And then, you know, 3 of them will actually show up and 1 of them will be worthwhile. And I think that's pretty common across any business that requires staffing, non-skilled staffing at this point. But by utilizing Facebook ads, we have a constant channel of applicants that come in, and we can keep their applications on file and we can return to them. Now, a lot of these guys have never been in a workforce where they don't have their choice of employer. They've, you know, so everyone's very price sensitive right now because they can go work at a gas station for, you know, 17, 18 bucks an hour. And so it's been a little bit difficult in terms of that. But, you know, we try to convey, especially for those who are already in the industry, because, you know, Valvoline leads the way pay wise, but Jiffy Lube and Take 5, they're pretty standard. They're hiring their techs for like 14 bucks an hour, their managers for 18, 16, 17 bucks an hour. So, you know, when it's an apples to apples comparison and we do get that guy with industry experience, we're pretty good at capturing them. For someone with no experience, like, we have a really good flow chart. And Michael, you can share with everybody on this call our new hire checklist, but We're not doing rocket science here, and we because our services are very pointed, and because there's very few SKUs, and because we have a very simplistic point of sale system, it does not take long to train someone. So to go back to the Milan, Illinois example, we 7 days before opening, we had our manager for 2 weeks. And then we fully staffed the store with the 2 other employees within 7 days of the store opening. And we actually had to fire one of them on day 3 and replace them within 48 hours. And so that's not common these days, but I think we will get back to a time where the I don't want to say advantage, but like, I feel like the workforce right now just doesn't realize how good they've had it, because they've never been in a workforce where they're competing for one job with 300 other people. Right now, everyone has their pick, and they're getting kind of aggressively cocky about it.
Right, for sure. Where are you posting that then, on your Facebook page, or are you going into the marketplace like on Facebook Classified or Facebook Jobs?
Individual stores we set all our franchisees up with an individual store page. So each store has a Facebook page tied to their address. A lot of that's for SEO purposes. But when you create a page for a specific store, there is a section on it that says jobs, and it's specific to creating a job. And so you create the job title, the range of the pay, and then you can boost it based on zip code and put it in front of candidates that way. And then it'll show up just in their feed. And so Facebook has the technology. They know who's been on Indeed.com. They know who's looking for a job. So they'll very pointedly put that classified in front of people who are actively looking for work. And that's why the conversion is so good.
Is somebody running that for each store, or is
we train the
ownership group?
We train the franchisees.
Okay.
We do offer social media services in-house for a flat monthly rate. We have 2 different levels. We talk about it at Discovery Day, but just like very high level, because customer reputation management's important. So for $15 a month, we'll respond to every Facebook and Google review. And then for $50 a month, we'll fully manage, the Facebook page, the Google My Business listing, and other aspects of the social media and SEO for the site. But that's just like a really macro, high level explanation. There's more to it than that.
What about turnover in the store? Are you seeing, how often do we have to be, recruiting to have like with us, we always have to have a pipeline for every department here, every role. Is that similar, or once you get somebody in, are you typically are you not seeing a lot of turnover?
So if we get someone from within the industry, they stick pretty well, because we've created an environment that is much more enjoyable to work in. At a very base level, I've owned a pizzeria in the past, and like kitchen work is about as turnover heavy as it gets, because there's no loyalty there to the work, because no one cares about being aligned. Whereas at a very base level in our space, these guys oftentimes come from a trade school. They often care about cars as an interest. And so they're a little bit more sticky than other industries. And so by not putting pressure on them to hit sales goals, by not putting pressure on them to do unethical sales behaviors, we've had a lot better time with turnover than some of our competitors. That being said, the biggest headwind we've had has not been, guys leaving. It's been keeping the guys inside the system happy because of the change in the labor environment. I've had guys that have been with me for 4 years that started off at $11 an hour that are just now getting to $14.50, and we're having to advertise $14 for someone with no experience just to get them to show up. That doesn't sit well with guys that have been with you for a long time, and then that puts upward pressure across the board. And that's kind of the conversation that's been lost in this whole minimum wage debate is not so much like bringing in new people for a higher wage. It's what happens to the people in the system that and their mentality and the overall, culture of the store when you have to do something like that.
Last quick question. If you're not, putting, I don't want to use the word pressure or accountability for the technicians to actually drive any daily or revenue goals per day, per week, per month, who's bearing that pressure in terms of the store needs to hit, whatever budget, I'm sure we're developing. Is that on the owner to make sure, the manager, someone has to bear the weight of making sure we are bringing in enough revenue. I understand why, we're not doing it on the technicians because we kind of battle with that in our industry all the time. So I get where you're coming from, but then who's making sure, I guess, the business plan each day is being achieved?
We think the model itself is what sustains the same store sales growth. And that's what we've seen. And so this is not something that can happen overnight outside of, getting fleet accounts. And so the cars that are being made today, it's literally impossible for every single car to roll through your doors and to need a secondary service. Where our guys need to be proficient is on not missing cross-sell opportunities that are legitimately opportunities to educate the customer. And so we've kind of approached this from a different perspective than some of our competitors. The traditional model has been to kind of, shoo grandma into the waiting room. She doesn't see what's happening with her car. She has no idea. They stick their finger in the power steering fluid and hold it in front of grandma's face and says, this is not the right color. She has no idea what she's looking at. And that doesn't make for a good experience. For a lot of people that don't own their home, their vehicle is the most expensive asset that they own. And so if we can educate the consumer on their property, then we might only present 10 cross-sell opportunities in a day, but if we convert on 9 of the 10, to
Right.
me, that's a higher, that's going to be a higher conversion, a better sales experience, and then long-term value from an LTV standpoint, that's going to be much more beneficial in the long run. So you'll see as the oil change intervals start to overlap, that benefit in same store sales growth. And that just comes from the model itself. Whereas, traditionally it's been, let's offer every single car that comes through the door a secondary item, whether or not it needs it. And if, we offer 30 things and we sell 7 of them, I'd rather convert on 9 of 10.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. Thank you.
Good questions. I know we're coming up on 8:30 here Pacific. Any last minute question, Christine or Nuri, before we end? Okay. Well, good. Costa, I guess we got 3 minutes here, but sounds like we got through a lot of stuff. And Brian, I believe you're going to be making it to our Discovery Day, so you can continue the conversation there. Thank you for your questions.
Sure.
So I guess that's it. Christine, I'll check in with you on next steps. And Nuri, I think you're working with one of my associates. Costa, any parting words?
No, if anyone has any questions, Michael can give my email. I saw that he already sent out an email with our new hire checklist. We've created a really simple model that is efficient and has the same unit economics as the larger players in our space. And that's kind of where our success has been. So if anyone's coming to Discovery Day, looking forward to meeting you and getting into the nuts and bolts.
Great. Super. Thanks, Costa. And just shoot me an email if you have any other questions. And otherwise, we'll look forward to chatting again on one of our planned calls. So thank you and have a wonderful week.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Costa.